France calls itself the land of liberty, the birthplace of revolution, the country that gave the world the rights of man. But what if modern France looks less like the champion of free markets, and more like the last surviving relic of a Soviet-style system in Europe? Not in ideology, not in flags or slogans, but in structure. In the way its economy works, in the size of its state, in the habits of its bureaucracy, in the relationship between citizens and government. To understand this, we have to go back to the beginning. In 1789, the French Revolution didn't just overthrow a king, it rewired the DNA of the French state. Unlike Britain, where power slowly shifted from monarchy to parliament over centuries, France detonated its old system in one violent explosion. And when the dust settled, the revolutionaries believed something radical. The state must embody the general will. The state must guide society. The state must reshape the economy. This idea never really left. Even under Napoleon Bonaparte, who crowned himself emperor, the centralization only deepened. Prefects were appointed from Paris to run the provinces. Tax collection, law, education, all flowed from the center. France became one of the most centralized states in Europe. And centralization is the first building block of what some critics compare to Soviet-style governance. Fast forward to the 20th century. After World War II, France lay devastated. Infrastructure shattered, industry crippled, confidence broken. In 1945, instead of embracing American-style capitalism, French leaders did something unusual. They nationalized huge parts of the economy. Energy companies, major banks, transportation. Renault became state-owned. Electricity became centralized under EDF. The French state didn't just regulate the economy, it owned it. This was called dirigisme, from the French word diriger meaning to direct. The government would direct economic development through 5-year plans. Yes, 5-year plans, the same term used in the Soviet Union, but in France, it wasn't communist. It was technocratic. Elite civil servants from schools like ENA designed industrial strategies, the state picked winners, the state built national champions, Airbus, nuclear power, high-speed rail. And it worked, at least for a while. During the Trente Glorieuses, the 30 glorious years from 1945 to 1975, France experienced explosive growth. Living standards rose, infrastructure modernized, the welfare state expanded. Citizens became accustomed to something fundamental. The government is responsible for economic security. But here's where the comparison to the Soviet model begins to sharpen. Today, France has one of the highest levels of public spending in the world. Government expenditure hovers around 55 to 58% of GDP. That is dramatically higher than Germany, the UK, or most of Europe. The state is everywhere, in healthcare, pensions, unemployment benefits, housing subsidies, cultural funding, transport networks, education, agriculture, and beyond. In France, the civil service is not just large, it is enormous. Roughly 1 in 5 workers is a public employee. That means millions of people depend directly on the state for their salary. In some regions, the state is the main employer. And these public workers are heavily protected. Firing a civil servant is extremely difficult. Labor laws are famously rigid. The 35-hour work week, introduced in 2000, became a symbol of France's belief that the state should regulate even the rhythm of life. Now, compare this to post-Soviet Eastern Europe. After 1991, countries like Poland and Estonia slashed public sectors, privatized industries, and embraced liberalization. France never went through such a shock therapy moment. It never dismantled its post-war system. It adjusted. It privatized partially, but the core remained intact. When François Mitterrand came to power in 1981, he actually doubled down. Major banks and industries were nationalized again. Wealth taxes were introduced. The state expanded further. Only later, under economic pressure and European integration, did some of this reverse. But even after privatizations, the French state retained golden shares, regulatory dominance, and cultural control. One of the clearest signs of this soft Soviet structure is France's relationship with protest. When fuel taxes rise, the yellow vests fill the streets. When pension ages increase, millions strike. When labor laws change, rail workers shut down the country. This isn't random chaos. It reflects a social contract. Citizens expect the state to guarantee stability. And when it doesn't, they revolt, just as their ancestors did in 1789. The pension system is particularly revealing. In France, pensions are largely pay-as-you-go, state-managed, and extremely generous by global standards. Attempts to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64 triggered nationwide unrest. In most countries, that shift would be modest. In France, it felt like a betrayal of the Republican promise. The French system is universal, state-funded, and deeply regulated. While often ranked among the best in the world, it is also incredibly expensive. The state reimburses the majority of medical costs. Private insurance plays a secondary role. Education is also centralized. Curricula are determined nationally. Teachers are state employees. Even private schools often receive public funding under contract. The French model assumes that equality requires uniformity, designed in Paris. Critics argue that this creates rigidity. Innovation can be slower. Hiring and firing are cumbersome. Taxes are high. Income tax, payroll taxes, corporate taxes, value-added tax. Entrepreneurs often complain that the system discourages risk-taking. Some of France's brightest founders relocate to London or the United States. Yet defenders argue something else. Stability. Low poverty compared to many liberal economies. Universal healthcare. Strong infrastructure. Nuclear energy independence. High-speed rail networks. A robust cultural sector. The French nuclear program is especially telling. After the oil shocks of the 1970s, the state made a top-down decision to invest massively in nuclear energy. Today, France derives a majority of its electricity from nuclear power, one of the highest shares in the world. This wasn't market-driven, it was planned. In a way, France represents a paradox. It is capitalist, businesses operate, markets function, luxury brands thrive, startups emerge, yet beneath that surface lies a dense web of state involvement that feels closer to the old planned economies than to Anglo-American capitalism. The difference is that France never abolished private property. It never eliminated political pluralism. It never suppressed elections. So calling it the last Soviet Union is clearly rhetorical. But structurally, in terms of economic centralization, scale of public spending, labor rigidity, and cultural belief in state primacy, France stands apart in Europe. Even Germany, often criticized for bureaucracy, has a more decentralized federal structure. The UK privatized aggressively under Thatcher. Scandinavian countries combine high taxes with flexible labor markets. France combines high taxes with rigid labor markets, a unique mix. There is also the matter of elite reproduction. France's top administrators often come from the same elite schools: ENA, Polytechnique, Sciences Po. This creates a technocratic class that moves between government and large corporations. Critics say this resembles a nomenclatura, a closed circle of insiders running both state and industry. And yet the French people repeatedly vote for leaders promising reform, but resist when reform bites. Emmanuel Macron came to power promising modernization. He tried to liberalize labor laws, adjust pensions, streamline bureaucracy. Each attempt met fierce resistance. Reform in France is slow because the state is woven into everyday life. So why hasn't France changed more dramatically? Part of the answer is identity. The French Republic sees itself not merely as a government, but as a moral project. La République is sacred. The state is not an external oppressor. It is the embodiment of collective will. That philosophical tradition runs from Rousseau to modern Paris. Another part is fear. The chaos of globalization, the rise of precarious gig work, financial crises, these reinforce the desire for protection. In uncertain times, a strong state feels safer. But there are warning signs. Public debt has grown significantly. Unemployment, especially youth unemployment, remains stubborn. Growth has lagged behind some peers. The fiscal burden limits flexibility. And as demographics shift, the pension system strains. Can France sustain this model indefinitely? Perhaps the more accurate question is whether France is evolving into something new. Neither Soviet nor liberal Anglo model, but a hybrid. A system where markets operate within thick layers of social protection. A system resistant to rapid change, but capable of long-term strategic planning. If the Soviet Union was defined by central planning without democracy, and the United States by markets with limited state, France sits in between, democracy with heavy state direction. It is the last major European country where the state still commands such a dominant share of national life without having gone through post-communist transformation. That makes it unique. Not communist, not authoritarian, but profoundly statist. The country that overthrew its monarchy in the name of liberty built one of the most powerful centralized states in the modern world. The revolution that promised freedom also created a tradition of state supremacy. So is France the last Soviet Union in Europe? Not in ideology, not in repression, but in its faith that the state must lead, protect, and plan, even in the 21st century. And that faith, forged in revolution, hardened in war, and institutionalized in bureaucracy, may be the most enduring legacy of all.